The rhythmic pounding of rain against the bedroom window should have been soothing, but to me, it sounded like nails being hammered into the coffin of my marriage. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Sandra's steady breathing beside me. She was curled up on her side, her body turned away, as it had been for months now. It wasn't always like this. Once upon a time, we were inseparable, wild, passionate, drunk on each other's touch. I still remembered the first night I took her, the way she gasped my name, nails clawing my back, legs wrapping around me like she never wanted to let go. But things had changed. Now, I felt like a stranger in my own bed. I turned my head, studying her silhouette in the dim glow of the city lights filtering through the curtains. Her dark hair cascaded across the pillow, her smooth skin barely covered by the thin sheet draped over her curves. She looked beautiful, untouched, pristine, even. But I knew better. I wasn't the one touching her anymore. The thought made my jaw clench, my fists tightening beneath the covers. I wasn't an idiot. I had noticed the late nights, the sudden obsession with her appearance, the way she kept her phone on silent and face down. She thought she was being careful, that I was too busy, too trusting, too blind to see the obvious. Sandra didn't realize that I had been watching her for weeks now. I sat up, rubbing a hand down my face, exhaustion weighing on me. Between running my construction company and keeping up with the facade of our marriage, I was drained. But sleep wouldn't come, not with the weight of suspicion crushing my chest. A soft vibration sounded from the nightstand. I froze. Sandra stirred slightly but didn't wake. Her phone was glowing, a notification lighting up the screen. I reached for it slowly, heart hammering in my chest, fingers hovering over the glass. But just as I was about to turn it over, she shifted, murmuring something in her sleep. I pulled back, my pulse raging in my ears. Not yet. I had to be smart about this. I swung my legs over the bed, moving carefully so I wouldn't wake her. I grabbed my phone from the dresser and padded out of the room, down the hall, and into my office. The space was cluttered with blueprints and contracts, the scent of sawdust and ink lingering in the air. I slumped into my chair, running a hand through my hair. I unlocked my phone and scrolled through my messages until I found the name I was looking for. Ethan Carter, private investigator. I tapped the thread, my previous message staring back at me. Damon, I need proof. Whatever it takes. His response had come hours ago, while I was still in bed beside Sandra. Ethan, meet me tomorrow. 9 a.m. You're not gonna like what I found. A cold chill crept down my spine. I wasn't going to like it. I already fucking knew that. Morning came like a slap to the face. I showered, dressed, and made coffee while Sandra remained asleep. She was always so tired these days, so drained. Maybe if I hadn't already put the pieces together, I would have believed it. By the time she finally woke, I was sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to read the news on my phone. Sandra strolled in wearing one of my old t-shirts, her legs bare, her feet making soft sounds against the floor. She was good at this, the act. She kissed my cheek like she always did. Like she hadn't been fucking someone else. Morning, she murmured, reaching for the coffee pot. I studied her, looking for cracks in the mask. Morning, I replied evenly. She poured herself a cup, adding just a splash of cream the way she liked it. You're up early. Heading to a site today? I nodded. Yeah. Got some things to take care of. She leaned against the counter, sipping her coffee. I was thinking of having dinner with Vanessa and the girls tonight. We haven't had a night out in forever. Vanessa. The same friend who covered for her last time. My stomach twisted, but I kept my expression neutral. Yeah? Where at? She shrugged. Probably that new sushi place downtown. A perfect alibi. A place where no one would question her being out late. I took another sip of my coffee, forcing my voice to stay casual. Sounds fun. She smiled, and for a second, I almost believed she still loved me. Almost. Ethan was waiting for me at a quiet diner on the other side of town. He was nursing a cup of black coffee, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When I slid into the booth across from him, he slid a manila envelope across the table. "Open it," he said grimly. I didn't hesitate. The first photo was of Sandra at a hotel bar, a cocktail in hand, wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. She was smiling, glowing, the way she hadn't for me in years. The second photo showed her leaning in close to a man. I didn't recognize him. He was younger, dressed in a suit, with an easy fucking confidence that made my blood boil. The third photo. I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. It was her. Sandra. Naked. Her hands tangled in his hair, her lips parted in a silent moan, her body. I slammed the envelope shut, my breath coming fast and hard. Ethan exhaled. "There's more." I shook my head, my vision tunneling. "I don't need more. I'd seen enough." Sandra wasn't just cheating. She was fucking him. Enjoying him. Betraying me with every moan, every kiss, every second she spent in his arms. My fingers curled into fists. "I want everything on this guy," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "His name, his address, his fucking blood type. Whatever you can find." Ethan hesitated. "Damon, I know what you're thinking, Ann. You don't know shit." He sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. "You're paying me to get answers, not to talk you out of doing something reckless. But whatever you do next, make sure you don't fuck up your own life more than she already has." I stood up, the envelope clutched tight in my hand. Sandra thought she was being careful. She thought I was blind. But she had no idea. She was about to find out exactly who the fuck she was married to. I drove home in silence. The manila envelope sat on the passenger seat, taunting me, its contents burning a hole in my mind. Sandra. Naked. Writhing under another man. Every image, every frame of her betrayal was seared into my brain. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, my mind spinning with thoughts I had no business entertaining. I had never been a violent man, but right now, the idea of putting my fist through that bastard's face was the only thing keeping me from screaming. His face. I didn't even know his fucking name yet, but I would. Soon. I pulled into the driveway, shutting off the engine. Sandra's car was still gone, probably at the gym, or shopping, or fucking that piece of shit in some hotel room. The thought made my teeth grind together. I needed to calm down. I needed a drink. By the time Sandra got home, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the windows of our kitchen. I was sitting at the counter, nursing a whiskey, trying to suffocate the fire in my chest. She waltzed in like nothing had changed, a shopping bag in one hand and her phone in the other. She looked effortlessly sexy, her tight jeans hugging her curves, a low-cut top showing just enough skin to make a man's imagination run wild. Except I wasn't imagining anymore. I knew exactly what she looked like when she took that top off for someone else. She set the bag down on the counter and kissed my cheek, her lips warm and soft. A perfect wife. A devoted partner. A fucking liar. "Long day?" she asked, her fingers trailing down my arm. "You have no idea." I forced a smile. "Yeah. Meetings. Paperwork. The usual." She grinned, pulling off her jacket. "Same. I swear, Vanessa talks way too much. I love her, but my God, she can't shut up about her boyfriend." I raised an eyebrow. "Vanessa has a boyfriend?" Sandra hesitated. Just for a split second. "But I saw it." "Fuck, I saw it." She recovered quickly, nodding. "Yeah, a new guy. I haven't met him yet, but she's obsessed with him." Lies. She didn't have dinner with Vanessa. She had dinner with him. I clenched my jaw and took another sip of whiskey, letting the burn distract me. "You should introduce me to him sometime. You know, make sure he's good enough for Vanessa." Sandra laughed, brushing her hair over one shoulder. "Yeah, maybe. But knowing her, she'll probably dump him in a month anyway." Every word out of her mouth was a performance. And I played my part. I smiled, nodded, pretended. But inside I was unraveling. That night, Sandra did something she hadn't done in months. She climbed into bed beside me and curled her body into mine. I felt her hand on my chest, her fingers trailing down my stomach, her breath warm against my neck. She wanted me. I almost laughed. She had spent her evening with him, and now she was coming home to me. Did she feel guilty? Did she think she could make it up to me by fucking me? Or was this something worse? Was I just another man to her now? I turned onto my side, facing her, my fingers grazing the curve of her hip. She bit her lip, pressing closer, her body soft and warm against mine. I knew where this was going. I should have stopped it. I should have thrown her off me and made her sleep on the couch. But I didn't. I kissed her. Hard. Possessive. She gasped against my lips as I rolled her onto her back, my hands roaming, gripping, claiming. Her body responded eagerly, her back arching, legs wrapping around me like she was desperate. But I wasn't stupid. I wasn't fooled. She was wet. Too wet. Like a woman who had already been touched that night. My stomach twisted, rage creeping up my spine, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I didn't make love to her. I fucked her. Hard. Rough. No tenderness. No love. I took everything she had left to give, and when it was over, she was breathless, flushed, panting beneath me. Her eyes met mine, and for a second, I thought I saw something flicker behind them. Guilt? Shame? Or was it just satisfaction? I didn't ask. I didn't say a word. I just rolled off her and stared at the ceiling, my body still burning with anger. Sandra nestled against my chest, sighing contentedly. As if everything was fine. As if she hadn't just spent the evening with another man before coming home to her husband. She fell asleep within minutes, her breathing soft and even. I stayed awake. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the rain against the window, my mind racing. Tomorrow, Ethan would give me everything. His name. His address. His schedule. I wasn't going to confront Sandra. Not yet. No, I wanted something else first. I wanted to look that bastard in the eye. I wanted to shake his fucking hand, pretend I didn't know, let him believe he was getting away with it. And then, when the time was right, I was going to rip his whole fucking world apart. I woke before Sandra. She was still tangled in the sheets, naked, her face serene in sleep. I stared at her for a long moment, my mind replaying the events of last night. The way she moaned beneath me, the way she clung to me like I was the only man in her world. Lies. The warmth of her body, the softness of her touch, it was all a fucking lie. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and walked downstairs. The air was crisp in the early morning, the scent of coffee lingering from last night. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my messages, and found Ethan's latest update. Ethan, got your guy. Meet me in 30 minutes. A name. An address. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door without so much as a glance back at Sandra. Ethan was waiting for me at a rundown diner on the outskirts of town. The place smelled like burnt toast and stale coffee, the kind of joint where no one asked questions. He was sitting in the back booth, a black folder on the table in front of him. I slid in across from him. Tell me. Ethan exhaled, tapping the folder. His name's Daniel Cross. 32. Works in finance. What of those investment firm assholes who play golf more than they work? Single, no kids, decent money. Not married, which means no pissed off wife to confront him for fucking around with yours. Daniel Cross. A name to the face I had seen in those photos. Ethan continued. They meet at a hotel twice a week. Sometimes more. He picks her up from her gym, and they go straight there. No stops. No hesitation. I clenched my jaw. Where does he live? Ethan pulled out a printout. Here. Midtown. Nice place. High-rise condo. He slid it across the table. Security's tight, though. You're not getting in without an invite. I studied the address. It was across town, the kind of place where rich pricks went to pretend they were better than the rest of us. So what's the plan? Ethan asked, watching me carefully. Because I know that look in your eye, Damon. And I need to know if I'm gonna have to bail your ass out of jail. I smirked, but there was no humor in it. Not yet. Ethan nodded slowly. You want more than just proof. I leaned back, gripping the folder. I want to see him. See him? I nodded. Face to face. I want to shake his hand. I want him to look me in the fucking eye, thinking I'm just some clueless husband. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. You're playing with fire. I shrugged. I like the heat. I waited outside Daniel Cross's office later that afternoon. The investment firm was in a sleek glass building downtown, the kind of place where men in $1,000 suits pretended they ran the world. I leaned against a coffee cart across the street, watching the entrance, waiting. At exactly 5:42 p.m., Daniel stepped out. My fists clenched. He was tall, well-dressed, with that smug confidence that only came from a man who had never been punched in the face. His hair was perfectly styled, his jaw clean-shaven. I could see what Sandra liked about him. He looked like money. And she was a whore for expensive things. I pushed off the cart and crossed the street. My pulse was steady, my rage buried beneath a calm mask. He was looking at his phone, distracted. Perfect. I accidentally bumped into him, hard enough to make him stumble. Shit, sorry man, I said, steadying him with a hand on his shoulder. Daniel looked up, startled, then flashed an easy grin. No problem, dude. My fault for not paying attention. I forced a chuckle. City life, right? He laughed. Tell me about it. I pretended to recognize him, squinting slightly. Hey, you look familiar. You go to that boxing gym on 12th? He shook his head. Nah, not me. I'm more of a weights and cardio guy. Figures. I nodded. Well, nice meeting you, man. He extended a hand. Daniel. I shook it. Firm grip. Fake confidence. I smiled. Damon. He had no fucking idea. By the time I got home, Sandra was in the kitchen, barefoot, making dinner. The smell of garlic and butter filled the air, the warmth of the house almost fooling me into thinking things were normal. She turned and smiled. You're home early. I walked up behind her, wrapping my arms around her waist, pressing a kiss to her neck. She shivered, leaning into me, her hands resting on mine. She didn't pull away. She still wanted me. I could smell her shampoo, the faint scent of perfume on her skin. She smelled clean. Innocent. Another fucking lie. Missed me? I murmured against her skin. She giggled. Always. Always. Lies, lies, lies. I turned her around, tilting her chin up. Dinner smells amazing. She grinned. Thought I'd treat my hard-working husband. She had no idea I had spent the afternoon shaking the hand of the man she was fucking. I kissed her. Slow. Deep. She moaned softly, pressing closer, her body melting into mine. I slid my hands down, gripping her ass, pulling her against me. She gasped. Damon, dinner! I lifted her onto the counter, knocking over a bowl of chopped vegetables. She laughed, breathless. You're insatiable. I kissed her again, harder this time. She had no fucking idea. I wasn't making love to my wife. I was claiming something that wasn't even mine anymore. She gasped as I unzipped her jeans, her hands fumbling with my belt. I fucked her right there on the kitchen counter. Hard. Fast. Ruthless. She came with a moan, her fingers digging into my shoulders, her breath hot against my neck. When it was over, she clung to me, her heart racing. I held her close, stroking her hair, pressing a kiss to her forehead. She smiled, nuzzling into me. I smiled back. She had no idea what was coming. Sandra was glowing after I fucked her on the kitchen counter, her breath still heavy, her body warm and pliant against mine. She ran her fingers through my hair, smiling lazily, completely oblivious to the war raging inside me. You're wild tonight. she whispered, giggling softly. I forced a grin, brushing a thumb across her lips. Guess I just missed you. Lies. She kissed me again, slow and lingering, her nails raking lightly against my back. Did she kiss him like this? Did she ride him the way she rode me? Did she moan for him the way she moaned for me just now? My stomach twisted, my grip tightening on her hips. She sighed, completely at ease, completely unaware that I had just spent my afternoon shaking hands with the man who had been inside her. Daniel fucking Cross. I knew what I had to do next. I had to break them. Later that night, Sandra curled up on the couch beside me, resting her head against my chest like she always did. A movie played on the TV, but I wasn't watching. I was waiting. Right on cue, her phone buzzed. She didn't move at first. Then, slowly, as if it was nothing, she reached over and picked it up, her body still pressed against me. I felt her muscles tense slightly as she read whatever was on the screen. She didn't know I was watching. She thought she was being careful. Sandra typed something back, then set the phone down face down on the armrest. I played along. I kissed the top of her head, ran my fingers over her bare arm. What was that? I asked, my tone casual. She didn't even flinch. Vanessa. She's thinking of setting me up with her cousin's friend, can you believe that? She rolled her eyes, laughing lightly. She thinks every woman who isn't married with kids is desperate for a date. My smile didn't waver. That's ridiculous. It was perfect. She had just given me her alibi for tomorrow night. Without even realizing it. I ran my hand up her thigh, squeezing lightly. Glad you're not looking for a new man, I teased. She tilted her head up, smiling. Why would I? I already have the perfect husband. I wanted to break something. Instead, I kissed her, slow and deep, letting her believe I was still under her spell. Let her believe that she still had me wrapped around her fucking finger. The next day, I followed her. Sandra left the house at noon, dressed in yoga pants and a sports bra, her hair tied up in that effortless way that made her look like she wasn't trying too hard. I had fucked her just this morning in the shower. She had moaned my name, her fingers digging into my arms, her body shuddering against mine. And now she was going to him. I kept my distance, tailing her from a few cars back. She drove straight to the gym like she always did. But she didn't stay long. Barely half an hour later, she emerged, her face flushed, sweat glistening on her skin. She checked her phone, smiled at whatever she saw, then walked around the corner of the building. I knew what was there. A side parking lot. A discreet entrance. And, of course, him. Sure enough, Daniel's sleek black BMW was parked there, idling. I watched from a distance as Sandra opened the passenger door, slid inside without hesitation. No hesitation. No guilt. She had just left our house, left me, and now she was with him. The car pulled out of the lot, heading toward the hotel. I already knew which one. I clenched my jaw, my heart hammering, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly that I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I could follow them. I could storm into that hotel room, catch them in the act, let Sandra see the moment her entire fucking world fell apart. But that wasn't enough. That wasn't the right kind of pain. Not yet. Instead, I drove to Daniel's condo. Security was tight, but I didn't need to go inside. I just needed to see. I parked down the street and watched as residents came and went, the doorman greeting them, the valet taking their keys. This was Daniel's world. Slick. Polished. Pretentious. I hated everything about it. I reached into my glove box, pulled out a small black case, and unzipped it. Inside, my old camera sat waiting, the lens clean, the memory card empty. I had used it for work, for taking progress photos of construction sites, but today, it had a different purpose. I stepped out of the car and took my time snapping photos of Daniel's building. His name was on the tenant list near the entrance. His car was registered with the valet. He lived alone. That would make things easier. I took more photos. The security cameras, the parking garage entrance, the best ways in and out of the building. I wasn't planning to kill him. Not yet. I wanted to ruin him first. I wanted to destroy whatever sick fantasy he had about Sandra. I wanted him to feel what it was like to have everything ripped away. By the time I got home, Sandra was already there. She was standing at the sink, humming softly, washing dishes. She had just spent the afternoon with him. Had she fucked him in a hotel bed? Had she let him have her the way she let me this morning? I didn't let my disgust show. Instead, I walked up behind her, sliding my arms around her waist, pressing my lips to her neck. She sighed, leaning into me. You're affectionate today, she teased. I smirked against her skin. Just can't help myself. She laughed, turning in my arms, wrapping her arms around my neck. You're in a good mood. I kissed her. Slow. Deep. Fucking poison. Why wouldn't I be? I murmured. Sandra smiled up at me, completely fucking blind. She didn't know that I had followed her today. She didn't know that I had watched her climb into Daniel's car like a woman without a care in the world. She didn't know that I was about to rip her entire world apart. Peace. Bye. Peace. Sandra smelled like vanilla and lies. As she curled up beside me in bed that night, her body warm and soft against mine, I stared at the ceiling, my fingers absently tracing the curve of her hip. She was already half asleep, sighing contentedly, oblivious to the fact that just hours ago, I had watched her step out of another man's car, her face flushed, her body relaxed in that way a woman only gets after being thoroughly fucked. I knew. I knew everything. And yet here she was, lying in my bed, touching me, loving me. Did she even feel guilt anymore? Or had she convinced herself that I was too stupid, too blind, too fucking weak to see the truth? I rolled onto my side, watching her sleep, my mind replaying everything I had learned. Daniel Cross. The man who thought he was winning. The man who thought he was taking something that belonged to him. I was going to show him what it felt like to have something stolen. But first I needed to finish setting the trap. Morning came, and Sandra kissed me lazily before heading into the shower. I sat up in bed, listening to the water run, my mind already working through my next move. She thought she had her routine perfected. She thought she had covered her tracks. But today, I was going to make her stumble. I waited until she was out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, steam still clinging to her skin. She looked radiant, refreshed, and for a fleeting second, I remembered the woman I had married. The woman I had loved before she turned into this stranger. Before she became his. I leaned against the doorframe, watching as she brushed her hair. So, I said casually, how's Vanessa doing? Sandra paused for a fraction of a second. A tiny hesitation, but I caught it. She's good, she said smoothly, running the brush through her damp hair. Why? I shrugged. I was thinking we should invite her and her new boyfriend over for dinner. There it was. The flicker in her eyes. The hesitation. She smiled, but I could see the careful calculation behind it. Oh, she's been really busy lately. I don't know if she's free. Bullshit. I pushed forward. What's the guy's name again? Sandra turned back to the mirror, her fingers tightening around the brush. I don't think she's told me yet. She was unraveling. Slowly. Subtly. But it was happening. I walked up behind her, resting my hands on her shoulders, staring at our reflection in the mirror. She looked at me through the glass, smiling just enough to keep up the act. I leaned down, pressing my lips to her ear. I just want to make sure she's with a good guy. Sandra let out a soft laugh, but there was an edge to it now. She can take care of herself, Damon. I met her gaze in the mirror. Yeah, I murmured. I'm sure she can. And then I left her there, standing in front of the mirror, staring at her own reflection like she was trying to convince herself that everything was fine. I spent the afternoon preparing my next move. Daniel Cross thought he was safe. He thought Sandra was his little secret, a beautiful woman he could fuck in the shadows while her idiot husband sat at home, blissfully unaware. That illusion was about to shatter. I pulled up outside his office building, parking across the street, watching as suited executives and assistants flowed in and out of the doors. It was almost lunchtime. He'd be heading out soon. I waited. And then, right on time, he stepped out. I watched as he laughed with a colleague, his confidence radiating from every movement. He looked untouchable, invincible. I wanted to see how fast that would change. I climbed out of my truck, crossed the street, and walked straight toward him. Daniel! He turned at the sound of his name, his brow furrowing as he looked at me. Yeah? I smiled. We met the other day. Recognition dawned in his eyes. Oh, right. Damon, wasn't it? That's right. I took a step closer, lowering my voice just enough. I just wanted to introduce myself properly. Daniel frowned slightly. Okay. I leaned in, just enough that only he could hear me. I'm Sandra's husband. The color drained from his face. I watched the exact moment the arrogance shattered, his body going stiff, his breath catching. He tried to recover, forcing a laugh. I don't know what you're talking about. I smiled wider. You do. His jaw tightened. Look, man, I clapped a hand on his shoulder, squeezing just hard enough. She tells me everything, Daniel, I said softly. Every little detail. His pulse jumped. I could feel it under my grip. I let my words sink in. Let him panic. Let him picture exactly what I wanted him to picture. Then I patted his shoulder, stepping back, my smile never fading. See you around. And then I walked away, leaving him standing there, frozen, his entire world tilting. That night, I let Sandra think everything was normal. She kissed me when she got home. I kissed her back. She talked about her day. I listened, nodding at all the right moments. We had dinner together, laughing at some meaningless joke, pretending we were still the same couple we had been years ago. And then, when we went to bed, I fucked her like I owned her. I was rough. Unforgiving. Claiming what was mine, making sure she felt every bit of it. She gasped my name, nails digging into my back, her body tightening around me. I didn't stop. Didn't slow down. Didn't let her catch her breath. By the time I was done, she was shaking, her skin flushed, her lips swollen from my kisses. She looked up at me, dazed, breathless. Damon! I stroked her hair, my voice a low whisper. You're mine! She nodded, still panting. Of course, baby. Lies. I kissed her forehead, pulling her against me, feeling the way her body melted into mine. She had no idea what was coming. She had no idea that Daniel Cross wouldn't be touching her again. Not after today. Not after I let him feel what it was like to be hunted. Sandra slept soundly beside me, her breathing soft and steady, completely unaware of what I had set into motion. I watched her for a long time, the moonlight casting shadows across her bare skin, highlighting every inch of the woman I once thought belonged to me. She still belonged to me. She just didn't fucking know it yet. I slid out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her. I didn't want her stirring, didn't want her asking questions about why I was up in the middle of the night. She had no idea that, just hours ago, I had looked Daniel Cross in the eye and let him feel the noose tightening around his neck. She had no idea that her perfect little fantasy was about to crumble. I grabbed my phone and walked down the hall to my office, shutting the door behind me. I pulled up Ethan's messages. Ethan, you really shook the bastard today. He called off work after you left. Cancelled his golf plans. Spent the rest of the day holed up in his condo like a scared little bitch. Good. Me, that's just the beginning. I wanted Daniel to suffer. I wanted him to know that there was no escape. I tapped my fingers against my desk, my mind racing. He wasn't stupid. He'd tell Sandra soon. Maybe not right away, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. He'd crack under the pressure. And then what? Would she come to me, crying, confessing everything? Would she beg for forgiveness, tell me it had been a mistake? Or would she run? No. I wouldn't let her run. Not until she felt what I felt. Not until she understood what it was like to have your world ripped apart. The next morning, Sandra was different. She was distracted, her usual carefree mask slipping just enough for me to notice. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She kissed me, but there was hesitation in it. She was thinking. Good. I leaned against the counter as she poured herself a cup of coffee, watching her carefully. You okay? She flinched slightly, but recovered fast, giving me a small laugh. Yeah, why? I shrugged, sipping my own coffee. You seem off. Sandra waved me off. I didn't sleep well. Lies. She had slept perfectly last night. I had made damn sure of it. I set my mug down and stepped closer, brushing my fingers down her arm. You know you can tell me anything, right? She looked up at me, and for a split second, I saw fear in her eyes. Not much. Just a flicker. But it was there. I kissed her forehead, lingering just long enough to make her feel it. You'd never keep secrets from me, would you? I murmured. Sandra swallowed. Of course not. More lies. More cracks forming beneath the surface. At noon, I parked down the street from Daniel's condo and waited. I knew he was in there. I knew he wasn't sleeping. And I knew he was afraid. Right on time, his door opened. He stepped outside, looking around anxiously, his movements stiff and unnatural. He was checking for me. Good. I watched as he climbed into his car, gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. He sat there for a moment, just breathing. Then he pulled out of the parking garage, driving faster than necessary. I followed. Not close enough to be obvious. Just enough to make sure he never felt alone. He drove aimlessly for a while, taking turns with no real destination, like he was trying to lose a tail that wasn't even there. And then he made a mistake. He pulled into a small bar, one of those upscale places where men like him went to drown their problems in expensive liquor. I waited 5 minutes before following him inside. He was sitting at the bar, staring at his drink like it held all the answers in the world. I slid onto the stool beside him. Daniel stiffened immediately, his fingers tightening around his glass. He turned his head slowly, like he was hoping he had imagined me. He hadn't. I smiled. Rough day? His jaw clenched. What do you want? I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. I want you to understand something. Daniel exhaled sharply, his whole body tense. Jesus Christ, man! If this is about Sandra... I tilted my head. If? He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Look, I didn't know she was married at first, okay? And when I did, You kept fucking her. His breath hitched. I smiled wider. I know everything, Daniel. I murmured. Every time. Every place. Every dirty little text. I even know about the time you bent her over in that hotel room while she still had my wedding ring on. Daniel paled. I chuckled. Oh yeah, I've seen the footage. There was no footage. But he didn't know that. His entire body went rigid, his hands shaking slightly. Listen. I never meant to. To what? I interrupted, my voice soft but venomous. To fuck another man's wife? Daniel shut his eyes, exhaling shakily. I ended it. I smirked. Did you? He nodded quickly. Yeah. I told her yesterday. She wasn't happy. Of course she wasn't. Sandra had lost her new toy. Poor thing. I tapped my fingers against the bar. Good. Daniel blinked. Wait, that's it? I downed the rest of my drink and stood up, stretching like this was nothing more than a casual chat between friends. Then I leaned in close. Listen to me, Daniel. His breath hitched. You're gonna stay the fuck away from my wife. He nodded rapidly. Yeah. Yeah, I swear. I smiled. And if you don't? Daniel swallowed. I don't want to know. I clapped a hand on his shoulder. Smart man. Then I turned and walked out, leaving him shaking in his seat. By the time I got home, Sandra was pacing the living room, phone in hand, chewing her bottom lip. She was worried. Anxious. Good. She turned when she saw me, her face carefully composed. Hey! Where have you been? I smirked. Just grabbing a drink. Sandra hesitated, then forced a smile. Oh. With who? I stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. You don't have to worry about that, baby. Her lips parted slightly. She was unraveling. Piece by piece. She just didn't know how far she had to fall yet. I kissed her, slow and deep, making sure she felt owned. She still thought she was in control. She still thought she had options. She had no idea that I had just burned them all to the fucking ground. Sandra was falling apart, and I loved every second of it. She didn't know I had seen Daniel. Didn't know I had looked him in the eyes and made sure he understood that every single part of his life now belonged to me. She thought she was still in control. Thought she could keep her lies woven tightly around me. But the threads were unraveling. And I was going to enjoy watching her choke on them. The morning after my talk with Daniel, Sandra was different. She was anxious. Jumpy. Every time her phone buzzed, she grabbed it too fast, checking the screen like she was expecting bad news. She was waiting for something. For him. I leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping my coffee, watching her out of the corner of my eye. You're up early. Sandra glanced at me, her smile too forced, too fake. Yeah, couldn't sleep much. I raised an eyebrow. Why's that? She hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. But I caught it. Oh, just work stress, she said, waving a hand dismissively. Work stress. Right. I smirked. Anything I can help with? She shook her head quickly. No. Just some deadlines. Nothing you need to worry about. I stepped closer, trailing a finger down her arm, watching the way her body tensed under my touch. You sure? She nodded, but she wasn't breathing right. Not deeply. Not normally. She was nervous. Good. Sandra left for work without her usual kiss goodbye. She didn't even say I love you. I watched from the window as she drove away, her grip too tight on the steering wheel, her body stiff. She was heading to him. I already knew that. I had Daniel's entire schedule memorized. And today, I knew exactly where he would be. I grabbed my keys and followed. Daniel's office was in a towering glass building downtown, a soulless place filled with men who thought their money made them invincible. I parked across the street, leaning back in my seat, waiting. Sandra's car pulled up 10 minutes later. She stepped out, checking her reflection in the window, fixing her hair. She still wanted to look perfect for him. Even now. Even after everything. She walked inside, and I let her. Let her think she was still one step ahead. But she wasn't. I waited exactly 15 minutes before following. The receptionist greeted me with a polished smile. Do you have an appointment? I smiled back. Not officially. But I think Daniel Cross is expecting me. Her expression faltered. Oh, let me check. She reached for the phone, but I placed a firm hand over hers, stopping her. She looked up, startled. I kept my voice low. Calm. No need, I said. I know where he is. And then I walked past her, straight toward the elevators. Daniel's office was on the 15th floor. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out and found him immediately. He was standing near the windows, his back turned, hands on his hips. Sandra was beside him. They weren't touching. Not yet. But the air between them was heavy. I closed the door behind me, locking it with a soft click. Sandra spun around, her face going pale the second she saw me. Damon? Daniel turned next. His expression was worse. Terrified. I smiled. Morning. Sandra took a step toward me, forcing a nervous laugh. What are you doing here? I tilted my head. Funny. I was just about to ask you the same thing. Her lips parted, eyes darting to Daniel. He was frozen, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might snap. I turned to him. Daniel. Good to see you again. Sandra's breath hitched. You. She stopped, realizing that I had already been to him. That I had already shattered the illusion. I took a slow step forward, and Daniel immediately stepped back. Damon, listen. No. I cut him off. You listen. The air in the room turned suffocating. You don't speak to my wife again, I said quietly. You don't text her. You don't meet her. You don't even think about her. Sandra sucked in a sharp breath. Daniel swallowed. I moved closer. Too close. His breath stank of coffee and fear. I leaned in, my voice barely above a whisper. Because if you do, I promise you, I will make sure you regret it. He swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. Why, yeah. Yeah, I understand. Sandra grabbed my arm, her grip desperate. Damon, please. I yanked my arm free, turning to her, my voice calm. Controlled. We're leaving. She hesitated. I narrowed my eyes. Now. And she followed. Because she knew she didn't have a choice. The car was silent. Sandra stared straight ahead, her hands clenched in her lap, her face pale. I drove slow. Letting the tension simmer, letting her sit in it. She finally broke. You knew, she whispered. I didn't respond. You knew, and you never said anything. Her voice shook. You let me. I slammed the brakes, pulling onto the shoulder, turning to her so fast she flinched. Let you what, Sandra? My voice was deadly quiet. She swallowed. I leaned in. Let you lie? Let you sneak around? Let you sleep in my bed after being in his? Her breathing was ragged. I reached up, brushing my fingers against her cheek. She trembled under my touch. I smiled. You had your fun, I murmured. But now you answer to me. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. Damon. I kissed her. Softly. Tender. Loving. The way a husband kisses his wife. She melted into it. Because she still wanted me. Because she still thought I was the same man she married. She had no idea how wrong she was. I pulled away, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. We're going home now. She nodded, blinking rapidly, trying to hold herself together. But she couldn't. Not anymore. I put the car in drive, merging back onto the road. She had no idea that this was only the beginning. She had no idea that I wasn't done with her yet. The drive home was suffocating. Sandra sat in silence, her body stiff, her hands gripping her lap so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wasn't crying. Not yet. She wanted to. I could feel it. The weight of my silence pressed down on her, heavy and inescapable. She knew I wasn't the fool she had taken me for. She knew the games were over. And now? Now she was terrified of what came next. Good. I wanted her to sit in it. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the fear, every drop of panic. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. The second we pulled into the driveway, Sandra practically bolted out of the car. She walked fast, her breathing shaky, her body tense. She needed space. She wanted to collect herself before facing me. I wasn't going to give her that luxury. I followed her inside, shutting the door behind me, locking it with a slow click. Sandra was standing in the middle of the living room, her back to me, her hands shaking. She turned around, finally looking at me, and for the first time since this all started, she looked small. Like she knew she was cornered. Damon, she whispered, her voice barely holding steady. I stepped closer. She stepped back. Talk to me, she pleaded, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. Please. I tilted my head. You what? She swallowed. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed. A slow, quiet chuckle that made her flinch. Is that supposed to mean something to me? I asked, taking another step forward. Sandra shook her head rapidly, her breath quickening. I swear, Damon. It wasn't. Wasn't what, Sandra? I cut her off, my voice sharp, venomous. She blinked, her lips parting, but no words came out. I closed the distance between us in a single step, gripping her chin between my fingers, forcing her to look at me. Wasn't real? I hissed. A tear finally slipped down her cheek. She didn't answer. Because she couldn't. We both knew the truth. Her affair wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just some meaningless fling. She enjoyed it. She chose it. And now, she was standing here, pretending she still had a say in how this all ended. She didn't. Not anymore. I ran my thumb over her trembling bottom lip, my grip firm but careful. You think you get to lie to me? To crawl into bed with him, and then come home like nothing happened? Sandra whimpered, her tears falling freely now. I murmured. No more lies. I brushed my lips against her forehead, slow and deliberate. She shuddered. Not from fear. From something else. Something darker. Something she didn't want to admit. Even now. Even after everything. She still wanted me. She was still mine. And I was going to remind her of that. I pulled her closer, pressing my body against hers, feeling every inch of her tremble against me. Her breathing hitched as my hands slid down her back, gripping her waist, holding her tight. She should have pushed me away. She should have fought. But she didn't. Because some part of her, some sick, twisted part of her, wanted this. Sandra's lips parted, her breath ragged, her chest rising and falling in uneven waves. I kissed her. Slow. Possessive. Not to comfort her. Not to make her feel safe. To remind her. To own her. She gasped into my mouth, her hands gripping my shirt like she didn't know whether to pull me closer or push me away. I made the decision for her. I lifted her off the ground, carrying her straight to the bedroom. She didn't resist. Not even once. By the time I was done with her, she was spent. She lay beneath me, skin flushed, body trembling, her lips swollen from my kisses. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. She was unraveling. I could see it. I could feel it. She turned her head, staring at the ceiling, her breath still shaky. I leaned in, pressing a kiss to her jaw, whispering against her skin. You're mine, Sandra. She swallowed hard. I brushed my lips against her ear. Say it. She squeezed her eyes shut. I'm yours. The words came out so soft, so fragile. Like they barely belonged to her anymore. I smirked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Good girl. She shuddered. She was breaking. And I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Sandra lay beneath me, her breathing uneven, her body still trembling from what I had just done to her. I watched her carefully, waiting for her to move, to speak, to do something. But she didn't. She just lay there, staring at the ceiling, her lips parted, her skin still flushed. She was breaking. Piece by piece. And I wasn't done yet. I leaned in, trailing my fingers down her side, my voice calm. Soft. You've been quiet, baby. Sandra swallowed hard, her throat working around the lump of words she couldn't bring herself to say. I smirked against her ear. Something on your mind? She tensed. I could feel it. She was coming apart at the seams, unraveling under the weight of everything she had done. Good. I wanted her to feel it. I wanted her to understand what it was like to lose control. To drown. To suffocate in the lies she had so carefully woven around me. Sandra finally turned her head, looking at me with wide, glassy eyes. Damon. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, my voice deceptively gentle. Yes, love? She hesitated. Then, I'm sorry. I exhaled a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. Sorry? I murmured. For what, exactly? She bit her lip, her eyes darting away. Coward. She wanted to apologize, but she couldn't even say the words. She wanted forgiveness, but she couldn't admit what she had done. I grabbed her chin between my fingers, forcing her to look at me. Tell me, Sandra. My voice dropped to a whisper. What are you sorry for? Her lips trembled. I never meant. I squeezed harder. Enough. No. I cut her off. You don't get to say that. She flinched. I leaned in, my mouth brushing against her ear. You meant every second of it. Sandra whimpered, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. She was cracking. And I was going to watch her shatter. The next morning, she barely spoke to me. She moved through the house like a ghost, her body stiff, her hands shaking when she thought I wasn't looking. But I was looking. I was watching everything. She barely touched her coffee. Barely ate. Her phone sat untouched on the table, like she was afraid of it. Because she knew. She knew Daniel wasn't going to text her. Not today. Not ever. I had made sure of that. Sandra stood at the sink, rinsing out her cup, her shoulders hunched, her posture tense. She wasn't okay. She was drowning. I walked up behind her, wrapping my arms around her waist, pressing a kiss to the side of her neck. She went rigid. I smirked. Long day ahead? I murmured against her skin. She hesitated. I don't know. Lies. She was already thinking about him. Wondering why he hadn't called. Wondering if something had changed. I tightened my grip, pulling her closer. She sucked in a sharp breath. Relax, I whispered. I've got you. She exhaled shakily, nodding. I know. But she didn't. She had no idea. At noon, Sandra left for lunch with Vanessa. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. I already knew where she was going. Straight to Daniel. Straight to the man who had spent months touching what belonged to me. I waited exactly 1 hour before picking up my phone and dialing his number. He answered on the first ring. Damon, he breathed, his voice already shaking. I smiled. I didn't say anything at first. I let the silence sit between us. Let him feel it. Let him drown in it. Finally I spoke. Where are you right now? Daniel hesitated. I'm at home. I hummed. No lunch plans today? He swallowed. I heard it. No. You sure? More silence. Then finally. Yes. Liar. Sandra was probably knocking on his door right now, her heart racing, her breath shallow, waiting for him to open it. But he wouldn't. Because he was afraid. Because he knew what I was capable of. I exhaled a quiet chuckle. Good. Then I hung up. And just like that, Daniel Cross was gone. She came home 2 hours later. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. I sat on the couch, pretending to be absorbed in my phone, acting like I hadn't already won. Sandra hovered in the doorway for a second, like she wasn't sure what to say. Then, Damon? I looked up, tilting my head. Yes, love? She hesitated. I could see the war inside her. She wanted to ask me something. Wanted to know if I had anything to do with Daniel's sudden disappearance. But she couldn't. Because if she asked, that meant she knew. And if she knew, that meant I wasn't the fool she had believed me to be. Sandra swallowed hard. Nothing. Never mind. I smiled. And she shuddered. She was trapped now. Completely. Utterly. And I wasn't going to let her go. Not yet. Not until she felt every ounce of the agony she had put me through. Not until she begged me to end it. Sandra was slipping. I watched her unravel, piece by piece, day after day. She barely touched her food. She barely spoke to me. She barely slept. She wasn't sure yet, wasn't certain that I had destroyed her little world, but she was beginning to feel it. And she was terrified. Good. She should be. The moment it finally hit her, the moment she truly realized she had lost everything, came 2 nights later. We were sitting on the couch, watching a movie. Or rather, I was. Sandra was pretending to, her hands fidgeting, her mind miles away. Then her phone rang. She jumped. She never jumped at phone calls before. I pretended not to notice, kept my eyes on the screen, sipping my whiskey. She hesitated before answering. Hello? Silence. Then, what? No, that's not possible. I turned my head slightly, watching her. She sat up straighter, gripping the phone like it was the last thing tethering her to reality. Are you sure? Did you check? Her breath hitched. She looked sick. Like the walls had just closed in on her. Okay, she whispered. Another pause. Then, I understand. She hung up. Her hand slowly lowered, phone resting in her lap, her body frozen. I let the silence stretch, watching her suffocate in it. Then, softly, Something wrong, baby? Sandra sucked in a sharp breath, turning to me too fast, like she had forgotten I was there. Her lips parted. For a moment, I thought she was going to tell me. Confess everything. Beg me for help. But then she swallowed it down, forcing a shaky smile. No. Just work stuff. Lies. I smirked, nodding slowly. If you say so. And then I turned back to the movie. Sandra sat there, unmoving, her entire world gone. She just hadn't admitted it yet. She tried to call Daniel the next day. She thought I wouldn't see it. She thought. But I was already 10 steps ahead. Her call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. And again. And again. Nothing. Her hands were shaking by the third attempt. By the fifth, she was crying. She didn't know where he was. She didn't know why he had vanished. But I did. Because I made sure of it. Daniel Cross was never going to touch my wife again. He wasn't dead. No. That would be too easy. He was alive, but I had made sure he had lost everything. His job. His accounts. His entire life. He had two choices, disappear, or risk finding out what happened to men like him. He chose wisely. And Sandra? Sandra was alone now. No more safety net. No more escape. She only had me. That night, I waited until she was asleep. Then I pulled her phone from under her pillow. She had been clutching it like a lifeline, as if one last miracle text from Daniel would appear. It wouldn't. I unlocked it easily. She had no idea I knew her passcode. I went to her messages. There it was. The last message Daniel had ever sent her. Daniel, don't call me. Don't text me. Forget we ever met. Brutal. I smiled. Then I deleted it. Erased every single message between them. Sandra would wake up to a blank screen. Like he had never existed. And the best part? She wouldn't even ask me about it. She was too afraid. The next morning, Sandra barely looked at me. She was distant. Empty. She finally understood. There was no way out. I had trapped her completely. And I had done it without ever laying a hand on her in anger. Without a single threat. Without screaming. Without violence. I had made her lose everything, and I had done it with a smile. She was mine now. Completely. Utterly. And she knew it. Sandra finally spoke that night. I was reading in bed when she turned to me, her voice small. Damon, do you love me? I turned my head, staring at her. She looked so lost. So desperate. I could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was trying to figure out a way to survive this. To fix it. To crawl her way back. To control the damage. I smiled. Soft. Loving. I reached out, stroking her cheek, watching as she leaned into my touch, begging for reassurance. Of course, baby, I whispered. She let out a shuddering breath, closing her eyes, her body finally relaxing. Finally believing that maybe, just maybe, I would let this go. That maybe we could move forward. That maybe I would forgive her. I never would. The next morning I was gone. No note. No text. No explanation. Sandra woke up alone. She called me. Over and over. I didn't answer. I let her panic. Let her feel the cold emptiness of the house. Let her realize she had been abandoned. Then, when she was finally breaking apart, I sent one single text. "Me, you thought I would stay?" Her reply came instantly. "Sandra, Damon, please." I didn't respond. I just sent one final message. "Me, you're dead to me." And then I blocked her. Erased her from my life. She thought she had won. She thought she had played me. But in the end, I was the one who walked away, leaving her with nothing. And that was the perfect punishment.